If you're anything like me, when you first encountered this decision from early on in Telltale Games' 2012 release, The Walking Dead, your mind was blown. Granted, if you were like me, you were 13 at the time, probably without the highest standard, but nevertheless. At that point in time, I'd never played a game that gave me a decision with so much gravity so early on. I'd never played a game that allotted me so much agency, to let me choose between who would most likely live or die. Sometime after that first playthrough, I came to the harsh realization that regardless of your choice, whether you help Duck or Sean, Duck will live and Sean will die. At the time, this felt like a betrayal, like my decisions and actions didn't actually do anything to the game. This has had me thinking about choices and whether they matter in Telltale's The Walking Dead. To provide some background, the first season of Telltale's The Walking Dead released serially in 5 episodes throughout 2012. In the game, you play as Lee Everett, a man en route to prison having been convicted for murder. He barely survives a gnarly car crash at the onset of the zombie apocalypse and stumbles upon Clementine, an 8-year-old girl whose parents never returned from a trip to Savannah. The game revolves around the dynamic between these two as the player controls Lee's redemption arc. You, Clementine, and an ensemble cast of survivors make their way to Savannah in hopes of finding Clem's parents and maybe some refuge from the apocalypse on a boat. The game is played as a third-person walking simulator where the player moves Lee through various environments, interacting with objects, people, and making discrete, binary decisions that bookmark major beats in the game's plot. Herein lies the game's key conceit. The game series adapts to the choices you make. The story is tailored by how you play. Based on what decisions you make, from helping some characters in small, even minute ways, to choosing who gets to live or die, the game supposedly adjusts to your choices, often presenting these cues as reminders. In order to understand choice and agency in Telltale's The Walking Dead, I'd like to invoke Janet Murray's definition of agency from her 1998 book, Hamlet on the Holodeck. She defines agency as the satisfying power to take meaningful action and see the results of our actions. Telltale's The Walking Dead seems to have been made with this definition in mind. The opening shot of the game tells the player that the game provides you with the ability to change it. This is far and away the most exciting mechanic of the game. The belief that your choices have made a tangible difference to the game's world in some way. I want to emphasize Murray's use of meaningful action in relation to action and agency, though, because, as I noted earlier, and many other players and reviewers on the Steam Marketplace have noted, the choices in The Walking Dead don't actually change the plot of the game. Despite being given control of a dynamic, rounded character in Lee, who himself weaves through dynamic relationships with the cast of survivors in the game, the plot remains static, almost in spite of the big decisions the game allows you to make. Agency, meaningful action here, seems to be nothing more than a guise to ferry you through the plot. In this way, the meaningful part of meaningful action seems to have been stripped away from the game. I think it worthwhile now to bring into discussion an opinion piece from video game scholar and designer Ian Bogost. In his Atlantic article, Video Games Are Better Without Characters, Bogost talks about the near ubiquitous focus of video games on individual, identifiable characters, and how this may not be what the medium of video games is best suited for. Bogost believes video games best function to explore complex systems and processes, allowing the player insight to an overview of syntaxes. He describes his early experience playing SimCity, the joy of discovering the dynamic relationships involved in urban planning. The game's focus on complex systems bigger than ourselves was a radical way of thinking about video games in the mid-1980s. As far as putting systems at the forefront of games, it may not be as radical today, but certainly niche. As Bogost would put it, relying so heavily on examinations of individual, embodied, identifiable characters in linear modes of storytelling does not accomplish what the medium of video games can achieve. This focus in and of itself may be a grievous mistake, a betrayal to the medium. So, if Telltale's The Walking Dead centers on providing the player with agency, but the meaningful part of agency is moot considering the linear, locked plot of the game, and if The Walking Dead's mere existence may be a betrayal to its own medium, why does the first season of the game work so well? Most of the criticism for the first season of The Walking Dead stems from this betrayed sense of agency, a broken promise that you, the player, can truly affect the game's outcomes. Regardless, the game has received massive amounts of praise for its emotionally complex and compelling narrative. How do we reconcile these polarizing sides of The Walking Dead? That the game has received heaps of praise while also being posited as a failure to the medium. With the criticism of The Walking Dead, there comes an assumption about choices, that the decisions provided to the player will have some demonstrable effect on the game's outcome and plot. However, agency construed as freedom in this way, the power to affect any or everything in the game world, is an impossible target to hit. Games create structure and meaning from rules and limitations. The borders of plot, game mechanics, level design, etc. all work together to create a game's rhetoric, a game's meaning. Ian Bogost coined the term procedural rhetoric to define how games create arguments through processes and systems as opposed to traditional visuals and language. He specifically notes that these procedural arguments are made via rules and behavior. An infinite number of accessible possibilities in-game would lead to a concurrent loss of meaning. Meaning, as used here, may be the key to understanding agency and The Walking Dead's success. Karen and Theresa Tanenbaum posit in their article Commitment to Meaning, a Reframing of Agency in Games, that the current understanding of agency in games stems from the discussion about choices and freedom, the ability to affect the game's world unimpeded in any myriad of ways, when agency may be better understood as a commitment to meaning, shifting the focus from the outcome of a choice toward the intent which underlies the choice. When viewed in this light, the meaningful part of Murray's meaningful action shifts from the tangible game world to the internal affect. Instead of focusing on the after of choices, yearning for an infinite number of plot possibilities, The Walking Dead presents choices for their affective value, for the emotional and empathetic connections you, the player, forge. Giving Clementine a candy bar won't have some catastrophic butterfly effect outcome, but in doing so, you're creating a caring persona for Lee. You're developing relationships. Even in the big, dire decisions, the game is not necessarily concerned with the ramifications of your choices, but rather with the implications. As you, the player, choose whether to kill or try to resuscitate Larry, the game itself may not have distinctly different outcomes based on your decision, but you, the player, feel the effects of making a difficult choice, of weighing the options of murder and Clementine's loss of innocence. In each decision, each dialogue option, each choice to save or let go of a life, the effect of the action, its palpable ramifications matter less than the decision itself. Telltale could have expanded far more resources to make a multi-cursal, ergodic, choose-your-own-adventure apocalypse game that extended in perpetuity, but instead they honed their focus on the emotional nuance in the story. Rather than having accessible infinite possibilities in game, the infinite possibilities exist in the mind of Lee and the player. Perhaps The Walking Dead is a game about choices themselves rather than the ramifications of those choices. Perhaps choices matter as long as they carry with them some empathic, human gravity. So, do choices matter? Yeah, I think so.